Anyway, Jasmina Jankicevic is coming. This is somebody I've known for a while. She worked at Allergan. She works at a really wonderful CRO, Innovaderm, started by a dermatologist, many of you know, Robert Bissonnette, and they're doing some excellent work. She's going to talk to us on clinical development strategy that patients need and investors want, and we had a really interesting conversation at dinner last night, so I'm excited to hear more. Thank you, and sorry for butchering your name.
That's my task for people, like practicing my last name, right? So, I wanted to tell you something. As I was standing here waiting to come to the podium, I was looking at the room and 3 thoughts came to mind. The first one was, we truly have a brain trust in this room right now. And I feel honored to be part of this community because building innovative clinical development strategies that are justifiable, relevant, and really efficient in roadmaps to taking an investigational product from a lab through all the stages of development, culminating in a successful launch and commercialization is really my passion. The second thought was then, oh my God, we have a room of amazing people who actually come here with diverse expectations, and how am I going to keep it relevant for all of you, right? And then the third thought was, well, the only way I can do it is if I walk in your shoes in the next 15 minutes. So I walk in the shoes of the sponsors, I walk in the shoes of CROs, I walk in the shoes of patient organizations that are here, I walk in the shoes of investors, practicing dermatologists. So that's what I'm going to try to do in the next 15 minutes. And one thing that is really putting us all together, and that's this desire and determination really to build clinical development strategies that are going to be what patients need and at the same time investors want. So if we are thinking about what questions would bring us together to it, I mean, these questions that you're looking at could be formulated in many ways, but it's what's behind these questions that it's really important. And if we look at the first question, it's really all about value. What value are you as a sponsor with your asset bringing to the patients and consequently to the whole community, the medical community, dermatology community? And why are you doing it? Are you starting with the why? And if you want me to be very honest with you, is we've in dermatology had these waves of focus on certain indications, right? So what that ended up being is that many companies are working in one indications. There is a few families of molecules that are being primarily investigated, and then on top of that, right, very few molecular targets are being tackled. What that resulted in, and is still resulting in, is a hyper competition in both clinical research and commercial space. So since I am speaking to you as the Chief Medical Officer of Innovaderm, I will tell you that this competition in the clinical research space is your big problem. Because when we look at indications like atopic dermatitis or psoriasis, or at this point in time, alopecia areata, and you are a small biotech who wants to do an early trial, well, good luck in enrolling patients. It's really not easy. Because on one side you have significant number of approved drugs that are actually working, so they're keeping many patients off the table as potential participants. And then in addition to that, you are in early stage, so the studies that are in later stages that have proven mechanism of action are more likely to attract these patients. And the third reason is your study is more likely to be complex because in early stages you want so many other things to learn about in order to make a good, solid go, no-go decision in the later stages of development, which makes those studies more complex and less attractive for patients because the burden is high. And in the best case scenario, they will be on the active arm and see any benefits. In the worst case scenario, they will be on placebo. And in these trials, you most often do not have open label extension. So what should you do? Well, in my opinion, the breakthrough is the answer. You should be bold, per astra ad astra. Through hardship to stars is really what I believe in. So it is lovely, and this definition of breakthrough is going to be different for each of us, right? So the breakthrough is very different at this point in time in atopic dermatitis versus rare diseases, many rare diseases. So there is this huge space of about 3,000 dermatologic indications counting variants that is completely uncharted. So start thinking that way, because just to remind you, prurigo nodularis was just 5 years ago in that white space, right? So if you want in 15 years to be relevant, it is time to also move away from these mainstream indications and start looking for what can you do in changing lives of patients with many other diseases. The second question is really a question of discipline. Clinical development is a discipline, and you need to have skills for that discipline. So when we're talking about making clinical development strategies such that your road to approval is shorter, we're not talking about cutting corners, because cutting corners in clinical development will get you nowhere. What we're talking about is a very conscious decision to be fast and to be innovative in your approach to designing studies in particular. So, couple of examples. First one is rare dermatology space, Seth and Frederick were just talking about it. So this is a great opportunity from a speed perspective, because you have the opportunity to communicate with regulators, unlike common diseases, very frequently and very early on. You can negotiate a lot with regulators. In general, the time to approval for rare indication is shorter. On top of that, you have a longer patent protection, so longer independent life on the market, and ultimately numbers so far are showing that it's actually cheaper to launch these drugs. On top of that, there is a promise of high pricing, which I would be careful about with the as exhausted healthcare system that we have today. I'm not sure how is this going to pan out. So that's why talking to payers, if you are in rare space, from very early on is extremely important to make sure that you can communicate readiness for those risks to your investors. And then the third question is really all about know how to partner. So who are you going to work with to help you synergize on one side your scientific and regulatory scope with your operational scope, because ultimately you need to get studies done that are going to speak to the value of your product. And that's where companies like Innovaderm are, for especially small pharmas and biotech, inevitable. You need a CRO. It is likely that you will, if not all, most of your activities related to clinical trials outsource. So you will put your destiny in somebody else's hand. So decision on who to go with is an extremely important one. The one thing that has always been very logical to me, and this is what I deeply believe in, because I still see patients and I really think that the patients are sort of the greatest information, has for the longest time been a nice narrative in addresses from different companies about patient centricity. Now being patient-focused in clinical development is not a matter of choice, it's actually a matter of request. You're probably aware that FDA has developed a whole platform called patient-focused clinical development or drug development, and there are already 4 guidances. 2 of those are final, 2 are still in draft, telling us what we need to do to prove that our clinical development is patient-focused. So this is one of my favorite flow charts, and that's why I'm sharing it with you, because it's showing you really in the preparation phase, in the execution phase, and in the communication phase of the life of your asset, what are all the instances where discussing with patients will help you understand the disease, will help you understand the differences in certain subpopulations, and will help you really partner and have a patient chime in each of these segments, and regulators are asking you to do it. The next thing is, so if you're stepping in front of investors, and I'm now in position as a member of the board and also as advisor, and I am in a couple of organizations who are mentoring startups how to pitch their assets or their companies, this is really a simplified version of what you need to be prepared for, right? These questions are the questions that you need to answer. And I'm helping you put your ducks in the row, but more importantly, I want to pull out one of these points, and it's point related to the risks. In most of the pitches that I've heard, in most of the discussions that I've had with biotechs and pharma companies and device companies that are trying to gain interest of investors, is a lack of ability to communicate the risks. What is your best case scenario? What is your mainstream scenario? What is your worst case scenario? And how are you prepared for those risks? So my big advice here is, don't speak only about what is good about your asset, also make your investors aware that you're prepared for every possible scenario. And that also speaks to you being early on, when you're planning your clinical development strategy, able to diversify, to have a platform that is going to allow you to use it as one of your risk mitigation strategies. The next thing that I want to remind you is, every stakeholder has a different perspective and consequently has different expectations. So I'm going to turn your attention in particular on payers, because those are our famous frenemies, right? So take a look how little interest overall they have in clinical development, right? It's frightening. The only thing that they care about is bottom line. Let's call it as it is. They care about the cost and the value. So the one thing that most of companies still in dermatology space are not doing early enough is involving payer in the process of building clinical development strategy. The other thing that I want to turn your attention to is actually alignment between sponsor and investors. Once you gain their support, they're going to be your very caring parents who is going to give you a tough up continually, so be ready for that. The next thing that you also need to be aware of, when you are in a stage of development, all eyes are at you. So really the clinical development strategy is crucial part of the corporate strategy, and you recognize in some of these pillars. The one pillar that I think is actually the highest contributor to difference between the success and the failure is actually team. So who are you choosing to work with is going to significantly influence the outcomes. And since I'm speaking here on the behalf of really a company that's a contract research organization, Innovaderm is a CRO. CRO is going to be one of your key partners. So partnering as early as possible and making sure that you've gotten to know these people, making sure that you have a team, making sure that your program is as important to them as it is to you, building very strong channels of communication and outlining exactly who is responsible for what is going to make a significant difference. The one thing that always surprises me, and being a chief medical officer of a CRO has a huge benefit in terms of exposure to different clinical development programs. In addition to that, I consult and serve as an advisor outside of Innovaderm. So on average, I see about 50 clinical development programs per year. And what surprises me to no end is that many companies do not have actually a good protocol optimization process. What that process is to do is to actually, on one side, clearly outline a scientific and regulatory scope, on the other side, outline the operational scope. And these two actually first have to be confronted in order to later on synergize. So Innovaderm is probably one of the very few extremely passionate companies about protocol optimization, and has a very strong process of protocol optimization that is done together with the sponsor, but involves a wide range of stakeholders. So when you are thinking about your scientific and regulatory scope, talking only to KOLs is not going to get you where you need to be. They are one of the players. The other important players are obviously regulatory experts, and the third one, I've mentioned it already, starting talking to payers very early on. On the other side, I rarely see that the companies are directly talking to investigators, not KOLs, investigators. Even rarer, they're talking to clinical trial coordinators and nurses that are actually executing your study, and they will first tell you everything that is going to go wrong based on your protocol. Then you're not talking with patients and not talking with families. Actually, even those perspectives are very different and will give you different input whether your study will survive in real life or it's going to be suffering severely from inability to enroll or inability to collect the high quality data. What is also often missing in the companies, the CROs should be the one offering it to you, is independent experts. These are the people who are otherwise not involved with your program. They have a fresh pair of eyes and they will tell you what is missing. And ultimately, CROs should be offering you different sources of information, databases. For example, Innovaderm is probably the only CRO who has our own algorithms to assess protocols, the feasibility of the protocols, and on the other side, once you're in the study, in the real time, really help you and tell you what's your placebo rate going to be. And that's after the problem of enrolling in our studies. That's the number one problem. The second problem is the placebo rates. So again, choosing the right partner makes all the difference. And in terms of endpoints, that's another weakness of ours. We know that we have some very volatile endpoints where inter and intra-rater variability is causing a lot of stir, and it has caused in the past phase 3 studies even to fail. So having the CRO who is able to really control that risks and prevent a failure is the way to go. And ultimately, talking about operationalization, there are many segments to consider there, but at this point in time, I will just focus on one, and that's the quality of the data. So I've mentioned already to you that you really need to go with a CRO who is telling you the truth. Innovaderm is proud to say that we are a CRO of integrity. And I will tell you, 2023 was a very successful year for Innovaderm. On one side, obviously, we had a lot of phase 2 programs, some phase 3 programs, actually some approvals of drugs that we developed together with sponsors, but on the other side, we had a lot of rescue studies. So these are actually the sponsors that came to us 2 years ago, and we gave them a proposal and tell them, listen, this is what can be done, and this is what cannot be done. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they went to someone who told them that everything that they are projecting can be done, right? And here they were, 9 months to a year later, telling us, you know what, help us, save this study for us. So you have the opportunity to actually do it right from the first time. So in terms of the process of deciding who do you want to work with, be rigorous. I mean, I'm speaking probably against my own interests here, but you should be rigorous, which means interview multiple CROs. Give them such criteria for providing proposals, BDMs, where you can clearly compare, and then make decision not based on what you like to hear, but what you need to hear. With that, I want to thank you for your kind attention, and I stay open for any questions you may have.